At the end of last summer, 2 friends and I went camping by a local lake. We drove out to the campsite, set up our tents and had dinner. Everything was going so well. It was a fun night. We lit a fire and sat around it talking for a while. It would be a long while before we were ready to go to sleep. We spoke about the lake and how it was responsible for claiming a fair few lives each year. Some say it's a place where people go to end things, and others say that the waters are deceptively deep and filled with tangled weeds, tree limbs, and the riverbed is lined with thick, unescapable silt and mud. As we 3 sat there in front of the fire talking, we all noticed something out on the other side of the lake. There were bright lights. Since there were other campsites dotted around the lake, we passed this off as simply another group of people camping out for the night. We didn't pay it much attention. After a while, I noticed that the lights seemed to be getting bigger and brighter. We continued chatting, and then the light caught our attention again. It looked as if it was moving closer to us. Again, it seemed to grow bigger and bigger. It was moving way too fast to be a rowing boat, and motorboats were prohibited on the lake. Before we knew it, the light had made its way to our side of the lake. The light was right in front of us, and then it was over us. It was as if we were being slowly swallowed by this bright light. In every direction I looked, I could see nothing but light. Just as soon as it came, it was gone. In total, I would say that the light was over us and around us for no more than 3 seconds, tops. My friends and I were smoking around the campfire before the light approached, and I remember this very clearly. I watched my friend light up as the light was moving, and by the time the light was gone, my friend dropped the cigarette he had between his fingers as it had burned down to the filter and burned the insides of his index and middle fingers. A fresh cigarette shouldn't burn down to the filter in a matter of 3 seconds. It seemed like we had some missing time we couldn't account for. Me and my friends didn't even have our smokes. They were gone. This wasn't even the strange part though. No, the smokes were weird. But it gets weirder. My friend who got burned started screaming as he didn't know what was going on, and his screams were the first thing I can remember I heard after that light passed over us. I think that I was in some kind of trance until that moment. I looked down and I was knee-deep in the lake. He was up to his waist in the lake, and our other friend was silently wading further and further into the middle of the lake. We both screamed out to him, and yet he didn't respond. We tried to get over to him as quickly as possible, but you know what it's like running in water. We were also sinking as we ran. I gave up and swam for it. The dirty lake water went in my mouth. I got to him first, since I was further than my other friend in the lake, and as soon as I reached him, I slapped his back and shook him until he regained consciousness. None of us knew what the hell we were doing in the lake. But I can tell you this, if my friend wasn't smoking, then things would have ended differently. The lake is incredibly deep in the middle, and since my friend was up to his chest, I dread to think what might have happened to him and us. The chances of drowning seem high. I have nightmares about me walking deeper and deeper into dark, murky water, unable to stop myself, watching the light above me grow darker and darker as I sink to the bottom. I know firsthand now how dangerous it is in that lake. I have no idea what that light was. Was it something paranormal or extraterrestrial? I don't think I'll ever find out because I'm never going back to that lake. We got out of the lake, dried off, and packed everything back into our car as fast as we could, leaving most of the things we brought behind. We left and nothing further happened, but that night is one I think about frequently. Last winter I went on a camping trip with some of my work colleagues. The location of the campsite was on some land owned by one of my colleagues' family members. It was his uncle's. His uncle passed away a while ago and the land went untouched and grew wilder with each coming summer. As soon as we got there, he said that the terrain was rougher than he had anticipated. There was a river and a steep hill, and surrounding the campsite from all angles was a thick, dense forest. It was the definition of secluded. We pitched a tent by the riverbank. There was like gravel in some areas, but we found a good spot. We built a campfire and made dinner. It was really relaxing. We were chatting long into the night, enjoying having the run of the land. We didn't need to worry about making too much noise because it was my friend's late uncle's land. As the hour grew later and the sky grew darker, we found ourselves running out of steam, and we began to wind down for the night. I was halfway through a story when I noticed that my colleagues weren't listening to me. They seemed distracted by something. They were looking beyond me, across the river, behind me. I turned to look and I saw a dark silhouette. It was the shape of a human. There was a person out there, on the other side of the river. It was a dark night. We only had the campfire, so we couldn't really see clearly. The mood shifted once we saw that silhouette. There was tension in the air. My colleague started to get nervous. It was his family's land and there appeared to be some kind of intruder or trespasser stood stock still, monitoring us. That person across the lake had no business being there. The shadowy figure seemed to hear our whispered conversation and retreated, out of our sight, into the darkness. My colleague said, "I gotta go check this out, I need to sort this out." And with that he got up and crossed the small dilapidated bridge to the other side of the river. He went off into the darkness and told us to stay by the campfire. I thought he was very brave to do that. I mean, if he had waited a couple of minutes, I guess we could have all gone with him, or at least talked about it. But it kind of was his land, and I guess the beers that we had shared had made him confident, so I thought, more power to you. We heard his footsteps fade out as he moved further away from the camp. We were just out in the elements with the sounds of the forest all around us. We couldn't get back the atmosphere we had before we saw the silhouette. After a few minutes we heard footsteps coming closer, and we assumed that he was coming back to camp. But the footsteps ended up changing direction, and they retreated back towards the darkness. One of my colleagues yelled out, "What the hell are you doing? We're over here." Then the footsteps turned into the sound of running, and they were heading towards the woods. It was eerie. Something was off and we were all a little freaked out. Concern for our missing camper began to settle in. We heard footsteps approaching our campsite again. I grabbed an empty beer bottle to use as a makeshift weapons if things got ugly, but I was relieved to see the face of my colleague. He sat back down next to us and said, "There was no one there. Maybe it was just a trick of the light or something." We told him about the footsteps we heard, and he seemed a little worried. Things were getting weirder and weirder. It was getting pretty sketchy. I don't think any of us wanted to spend the night there anymore. None of us wanted to be the first to say, "Let's go home," though. Then we heard noises from the woods. More footsteps. Rocks were being thrown, and other weird noises. That was enough. There were people out here, and they were hostile. We packed up and got out. We went home without seeing a single person. Whoever was out there messing with us knew the hills and the woods better than my colleague did. I'm not sure what the hell that was, but I'm glad we didn't stick around to find out what would come next. I heard this one from my teacher when I was at university, and I felt like sharing it. So he and his friend went camping in a village in Wakayama Prefecture. They set up their tents by a river, just as the sun was going down. Later, they were both in the tent together, chatting. His friend turned to him and said, "Hey, can you hear something?" He could, a kind of dragging sound coming from outside the tent. The tent was unzipped, so he looked out, but he couldn't see anyone out there. The noise didn't go away though. It sounded like something was being dragged around the tent. My teacher and his friend got out of the tent and had a look around, but there was nothing out there which could be making that noise. There was no one in sight. When they got out of the tent, they couldn't hear the noise, but the second they were back in, they could hear it again. It was the strangest thing. It almost sounded like footsteps, like someone was dragging their feet as they walked. It made the pair of them feel uneasy, so they lit their lanterns and campfire and went about making dinner. While they ate, they couldn't hear that weird noise outside, so they felt a little more at ease. Later, as the hour grew late, they returned to their tent and got ready for bed. As soon as they got back into the tent, they heard the dragging sound again. They spoke about that noise and they agreed that it sounded like someone dragging something, or their feet. They were really freaked out at this point, so they stayed in their sleeping bags and stayed awake. The sound wouldn't go away, the dragging sound just kept circling and circling the tent. They both must have checked 10 times each, but they never saw anything out there. It was unexplainable and terrifying. Eventually, they both managed to convince the other that it wasn't anything much to worry about, and they were able to get to sleep. The next morning when they woke up, they couldn't hear anything, and because nothing happened during their slumber, they guessed that they got themselves worked up for nothing. They went about packing their things away. While getting everything sorted, they noticed something. Beneath their tent, they found a pair of old, weather-damaged sandals. My teacher, who is a local to the area, said that a month before he went camping, an elderly woman lost her life in the river. My teacher believes that the circling sound was the spirit of that old woman searching for her missing sandals. This happened many years ago, during autumn. My parents told me we were going camping, and I was allowed to bring a friend. I couldn't wait. I knew it was going to be fun. So when the weekend arrived, my parents and my friend and I went off into the mountains for a camping trip. It was only a one-night trip, but that was plenty for me. This took place when outdoor camping didn't seem as popular as it is now. When we arrived at the campsite, we were surprised to see that there were no other campers in sight. To be honest, it felt a little bit lonely. I soon forgot about that feeling since I was a schoolboy. I saw the campsite as our own private playground. We played by a nearby river and in the woods, and then later that night we had a campfire and a barbecue. It was really great. Just before bedtime, my friend's mood changed. Usually he was full of self-confidence, but when the sun went down, his spirits dampened. He started to get homesick and frightened. Eventually he told me, through tear-filled eyes, that he wanted to go home. By the time he asked, it was far too late. My parents had had a drink and we were getting ready for bed. We turned in for the night. The sounds of the forest all around us. It was pretty spooky out there in our tent, in the wild. But we were able to get to sleep without any issues. The next morning, we left for home. We planned on spending a little longer at the campsite, but my friend was clearly in a bit of distress, and we headed home early. We left while it was still dark out. I can't remember what time it was in the morning, but it felt like everyone wanted to get out of there as soon as possible. So we returned home, and since it was the weekend, my parents went up to their bedroom to take a nap or something. Well, they said they were going to take a nap, but I heard a lot of banging around coming from up there. Anyway, it was still early in the morning, and I was pretty tired. I nodded off while I was sitting on the sofa watching the morning cartoons. I woke up when the house phone rang. Back then we didn't have caller ID displays on our phones, so I had no idea who was calling. I was hoping it would be Grandpa. My parents showed no sign of coming downstairs to answer the call. It just kept ringing and ringing, so I picked it up. "Oh hey, good morning!" The voice belonged to some girl I didn't immediately recognize. Based on my recollection, I would say that she sounded about my age, or perhaps it was an older woman with a youngish-sounding voice. The more I think about it, the more I think it could be plausible. Because I didn't think I gave any of my classmates my home phone number. I didn't say anything for a while, I just listened. "Anyway, camp was fun last night. The barbecue was really great too, those shrimp were delicious. I had a good laugh when your friend, who's usually so cheeky and confident, started tearing up because he was homesick. I still kept quiet. I was still sleepy at the start of the call, but now I was waking up. Something wasn't right. I was starting to get a little scared. There were only 4 of us at that campsite. How the hell did someone else know what we were doing out there? I couldn't answer that question by myself, so I asked the mysterious person on the end of the line. After some silence, some potentially shocked silence, I got my answer. Not the answer I wanted or expected. Because we were together the entire time. And with that, I heard a click, followed by the dial tone. I was really freaked out, but I instantly thought that I might have been pranked by my friend. I called him immediately, but he said that he didn't tell anyone about what we did at the campsite, except his parents. He said he was so embarrassed by everything, he didn't even tell them the part where he was feeling homesick. When my parents came downstairs after their nap or whatever they were doing up there, I asked them if they gave anyone our number or told anyone about the camping trip, but they said they didn't tell anyone or give anyone our number. The only person they gave our number to was the person who reserved them the camping site. In the end, I guess, or maybe hope is the abject word here, that it was a prank and nothing more. But I have a strange feeling that we were being watched by someone that night in the woods. I cannot forget the last words I heard on the phone. Because we were together the entire time. When I was in elementary school, I joined a camping trip for 2 nights hosted by the school during summer vacation. The campsite was about 2 hours from the nearest town. It was a proper camping trip. Even though it was technically a campsite, it wasn't very well maintained. There was a kitchen and a bathroom, and that was good because at least it wasn't just the tents, you know? But the place wasn't in great shape. Everything was dated and kind of shabby. The toilet was more of an outhouse, to be honest. It was way out in a field. The campsite was really close to some swampland, and on the other side was a cliff. Even as a kid, I remember thinking, this is a really unsafe place to camp. We had plenty of activities available, such as hiking and fishing in the day, and campfire and doing dares at night. On the first night I was there, I took up one of these dares. I thought it would be a simple dare, but it was different to the ones I did that age. We call them tests of courage. And, you know, they're not usually this intense. This was a dare that was created by the teachers, by the way. And it went like this. Go into the woods at night without a flashlight alone and stay there for a while. There were rules to this dare too. If you start running or you scream, you'll alert the wild animals and become one of the kids who go missing around here. This is what the teachers said. I can understand that they were trying to make it fun for us, and I'm pretty sure that we were perfectly safe, but looking back on it, I guess that was kind of strange. We were told to stand there, in the woods, with no light, in complete darkness, and in complete silence, until one of the teachers came back to get us. Even though I didn't really want to do this, I went along with him. I was somewhere far from home and far from civilization in the mountains. I was a pretty obedient kid. So I walked with the teachers and their flashlights out into the middle of the woods. It was so dark, and all I could hear was the sound of insects and the slow sigh of the trees. We got to where I guess was the designated spot, and the teachers' flashlights went off, and I heard them trudge away over broken branches and through thickets of weeds and bush. When that flashlight went off, there was nothing but darkness all around. There should have been other kids close by doing the dare with me, but I couldn't hear anyone else. I couldn't tell if my eyes were open or if they were closed. It was that dark. The air was acrid and warm. It seemed to cling to my skin. I heard the occasional rustle of bushes and the call of the wild. Some unknown animal was barking in the distance. I hoped that it was the distance. It was hard to say if it was near or far. I guess in reality, I was only out there for a few moments. No longer than 5 minutes at tops, I guess. But those moments felt so long. It was so isolating. I felt completely alone in the world. Then the flashlights came out of nowhere and came straight towards me. I was relieved that they were back and I wasn't alone anymore. We all headed back to the campsite together. Our teachers were saying, "Oh, we're all lucky that we didn't see anything creepy this year." We were joking, and I guess I felt kind of brave and mature. It was good. The rest of the night was pretty uneventful, to be honest. The next day, I noticed that my friend who did the dare around the same time as I did was looking awfully frightened. She was looking towards the cliffs, and when I asked what happened, she just replied, "Can't you see them?" I looked at her puzzled. "Come take a look." She took me to the edge of the field towards the cliffs. "Look down there." I looked down there and I couldn't see what she was talking about. There was nothing but a flowing stream down below. But my friend looked like she was on the verge of tears. "The kids with red faces down there, can't you see them?" She said that she could see a girl and a boy that I couldn't. She was shouting and crying. It clearly had upset her. Soon after, the teachers came over to see what all the fuss was about and to try and console her, but just like me, they couldn't see what she was talking about. I was worried about my friend, but life on the campsite carried on, and as you know, kids have short memories and attention spans. I guess we all got distracted and forgot about it. Later that night, I was really tired, but a lot of the other kids were still awake and still lively. I was snug in my sleeping bag and on the verge of sleep. I heard them whispering excitedly and happily in the glow of the lamplight. And just as I was about to fall asleep, I heard the tone of the kids around me shift. Excitement gave way for tension, and I heard them whisper, "Are you okay? Wait, let me go get the teacher." I popped my head out of the sleeping bag and I saw two girls leaning over another girl sat on the floor leaning forward. The girl on the floor was complaining of pain. "It hurts. It's so heavy. Help me," she said. She was complaining of feeling crushed, and right before our eyes she folded. Her chin was nearly touching the floor. It was as if something heavy was on her back. She cried and she screamed, and everyone in the tent was panicked. It was one of those huge outdoor tents, by the way. Everything was happening so fast. It was so stressful. Everyone was so frightened. I never heard screaming like that before. The teachers came rushing in, and one had a bottle of salt in their hand. He sprinkled it everywhere and started hitting the girl in the back with his palm, and miraculously, the girl stopped crying and screaming. She was up on her feet like nothing had happened. After that, nothing else of note really happened. We went home without issue. On the bus home, I spoke with some of my friends and other groups of kids I weren't friendly with about what happened. Some kids had different experiences. One said that when they went to the outhouse at night, there was a kid they didn't know stood stock still, staring at them. Another kid said that they saw shadows everywhere they looked, humanoid shadows. I was really surprised that there were more experiences. The mountains are a truly unusual place. My friend who saw those kids with the red faces has been kind of mountain phobic since that trip. I can't even remember why I wanted to go on that trip. It feels like some vague half memory, like it was some liminal space. This happened when I was in high school. My friends and I were all camping together deep in the forest. We had just finished dinner, and we were clearing things up, joking around, and that's when I heard a huge thud. By the expressions on my friends' faces, I was certain that they had heard it as well. It sounded as if something had fallen by our tent. It was dark. We grabbed some flashlights and we went in search of the source of that thud. There was something big and white laying on the ground. It looked like an animal. We were freaking out. We shone our torches at it from a distance. The more we looked at it, the more it looked like a body. A human body. He had fair or balding hair, and we approached slowly. Something was wrong though. His limbs were bent in impossible angles. We rushed in, realizing the gravity of the situation, and we got close enough to have a good look. We now knew that it wasn't a human, but it was as big as a human. It was a mannequin. Where the hell did that come from? Did someone throw that at us? We scanned the area with our torches, and no one was around. We didn't even hear footsteps or anything when it happened. We were camping deep in the woods, and we didn't see anyone else the whole day. One of our friends decided to be a watchman, while the rest of us packed up as fast as we could. We got the hell out of there, leaving that creepy mannequin lying face down in the dirt. This happened when I was a child. My parents and I went on a camping trip with some family friends. There was a big lake by the campsite. It was a really peaceful and secluded area. We all put up our tents close to the river, and we were set to camp for 2 days. When night came, my friends were talking about doing some dares. The adults overheard us and told us not to do any dares at night because it might be dangerous. Well, of course, we all ignored our parents' advice. The dare was to walk around the lake by yourself with no flashlight when it was dark. One of my friends offered to go first. We all waited in silence as she walked off into the darkness. She came back after a while. She wasn't frightened in the slightest. Next was my turn. They urged me forward. I was nervous. I felt the pressure of my friends. I had to do it. It was so dark. I was getting really worried. I was walking around the lake. Only the sounds of nature could be heard. Until I heard footsteps approaching me. I prepared myself as best I could for whoever or whatever was coming towards me. It looked like one of my parents' friends. He was walking with a flashlight. I knew him. I was relieved. I waved at him as he approached, and he strolled towards me. Here. He handed me something. It was a lemon candy, and I thanked him. You should eat that now, he said in a hushed voice. I told him I'd eat it later, and I put the candy in my pocket. He was shining his torch at me. I couldn't see his face clearly. He had his hood up. Come with me, he said. It didn't sound normal. I said that I had to go back to my tent. I thought it was really weird because he was such a nice guy, and we were really enjoying the camping trip with his family and my family. When I got back to the tent, we all decided we'd get some sleep. I was lying in bed holding that candy thinking about how I should thank him tomorrow for it. So in the morning I walked over to him while he was drinking coffee and I thanked him for the candy. Lemon candy? What are you talking about? I didn't give you any candy, he said. I thought he was just teasing me, trying to trick me or something. After a while I could tell he wasn't joking. He said he wasn't at the lake that night. My mum came out of the tent. She had heard our conversation. It got weirder and weirder. I went back to my tent and I got the lemon candy to show them. All of the parents and my friends looked concerned and frightened. Who was that person I met at the lake? I threw that piece of candy away as our families packed up our things. We got out of there as soon as we could. This happened in 2009 when I was fishing in the summer. It was an area with steep hills and cliff faces. It seemed like a place where locals wouldn't pass through, as it was a bit of a trek to get there. It is said that the river is home to big game fish. It was really secluded. It was the weekend, and I imagined there to be a couple of people, but I was delighted to find that I was the only person pitched up on the river. After setting up my tent, I cooked and relaxed a little, then went off to sleep in my sleeping bag, in the tent. It was nighttime. I planned on getting up early to start fishing at daybreak. I was having a perfectly sound night of sleep until I heard this horrible loud sound. It shocked me out of sleep. I opened my eyes immediately. I didn't know where I was for a second. I hate that feeling. I couldn't hear the sound anymore, but my tent was shaking. I looked at my watch. It was 2 a.m. I told myself in my half-asleep state to remain calm and composed. I thought, wow, maybe this is that sleep paralysis I've heard about. I considered that it might be happening, or I was suffering from some sort of auditory hallucination. But this just seemed too real. This was no sleep paralysis, I realized with a shudder. Another possibility crossed my mind, a rock fall. I remember checking the cliff before I pitched my tent. It wasn't rocky. The soil was hard and dry, since it was summer. But this wasn't an impossibility. I didn't think that it could be a human in the middle of the night outside my tent. That thought was too terrifying to consider in the dark alone, so I tried to think of other possibilities. Because I was working myself up, getting frightened, I knew I wouldn't be able to go back to sleep. I turned on the light in my tent, which put me at ease a little, but I didn't feel like going outside to check. I told myself not to worry, as soon it would be bright outside and I would be fishing. Just as I was calming myself down, I heard something outside. It was quiet for a moment, until I heard another sound. It sounded like someone wailing, moaning, and groaning, whatever. I felt as if I was going to pass out from the fear. On the other hand, I was thinking, it's a bit lighter now. What if it is a person and they need help or something? I was worried for whoever might be out there, so I decided to leave my tent. Just as I reached for the tent zip, the moaning got louder. I paused for a moment. Cold sweat teemed from my brow. I could see something outside, the other side of the tent, a dark shadow. Now I was certain that someone was out there. I grabbed my torch and my frying pan as a weapon. I pulled the zipper down and decided to face whoever was out there messing with me. I leaned out and looked around. I scanned everywhere. There was nobody around. I could see a fishing boat in the distance, but that was all. I couldn't see the owner of that shadow that darkened my tent. It was deathly silent. It was truly terrifying. I withdrew back into the tent. If you think about it, the tent was illuminated by my torch from the inside, so I shouldn't have been able to see a shadow outside due to the light. It was absolutely unexplainable. I turned the radio on to calm myself. I was shivering in my tent, trying not to think about what had just happened. After a while, I was listening to the DJ chatting between the tracks. I was slowly regaining some composure. But then, the roof of the tent collapsed inward. It hit the ground, accompanied with a horrendous sound. I knew this time that it was no dream or hallucination. The roof of the tent was utterly destroyed. Moreover, it hurt me badly as it crashed in. I felt totally helpless, and I'm not ashamed to say this. I broke down and I started crying. I vowed to go home without doing any fishing as soon as the sun came up. The moaning sound outside persisted. There was a new sound now. It sounded like something dragging across the ground, or crawling perhaps. I don't know why, but I turned the radio up to its maximum volume. Kind of felt like the only defense I had left. When daybreak finally came, it was like seeing God or something. I was so relieved. The sun was up now, and I could finally see everything around me. I went out of the tent and looked around the area. There were beer cans, bottles, and flowers scattered everywhere. I hurriedly folded the remnants of my busted tent, but I stopped in my tracks when I realized that there was blood on the outside of it, as if someone had smeared it. Above, on the cliffs, there probably was a road at some point. I wondered if there had been some kind of accident there. Maybe someone passed away in the area I set up camp, and perhaps due to the nature of their death, they became some kind of horrible spirit that tormented me. I didn't know what else to do, but I offered my remaining juice to whatever spirit might be around, left as an offering to ease their passing and wish them happiness in their next life. I chose to believe this because the reality of some people or a person out there messing with me and my tent in the middle of the night is just too terrifying to consider. I work for a wildlife magazine. My job is to take photos of animals in their natural habitat. A normal working day for me would be setting up my tent on a mountain trail and waiting for animals to come along. I also use an infrared sensor hooked up to an automatic shutter. I never use popular mountain trails, as animals would be too scared to come out if lots of people are around. I have never been frightened on the job, although I am always working alone in the dark. I have never had any troubles, until now. I arrived at about 1 o'clock to the area I had previously researched online. It was by the bank of a swamp. The usual routine is I set up my one-man tent and then take a nap till about 5 p.m. Because I'm always camping deep in the mountains, there's never anyone around. It feels safer than the city, in many ways actually. That afternoon, I hung my radio from a tree branch and got in my tent ready to go for a nap. When I woke up later, it was already dark. I hung my lantern from the tree branch and started getting my camera equipment ready. I put my headlamp on and prepared to shoot some photos. I remembered being unusually tense and full of anticipation. I headed out of the tent, and that's when I noticed something strange. Upstream from the swamp, about 10 meters away, I noticed a tent. It was a blue tent. It was weird. This wasn't a fishing area. This was a totally uninhabited area. I didn't think it was a mountain climber or a hiker. I couldn't imagine anyone else being here but me. I could see no light coming from that tent. Maybe someone was asleep in there. Nevertheless, that tent wasn't there when I was setting up mine. Did someone come along silently whilst I was sleeping? It's kind of weird that whatever noise they made didn't wake me up. Anyway, I pushed on and started looking for a good place to take photos. At that moment, a light went on in the blue tent, which made the tent color change. It went a darker color. Maybe I should go say a courteous hello, I thought. But then I decided against that idea, as the tent freaked me out a bit. That's really an excuse though. I didn't want to go anywhere near it. I was scared of it, and whoever might be inside it. I wanted to move to another spot. It would be a pain, but I didn't think I would be able to concentrate with that tent on my mind. I set about dismantling my tent as quietly as possible, whilst trying to remain out of sight of that tent. I gathered up my stuff and began trekking deeper into the mountainous woods. I must have walked over 1 kilometer alongside the river up the mountain. I set up camp at the top of a steep hill. By the time I put my tent up again, it was unfortunately too late to do any photography. It was past 9 o'clock. I decided to have some dinner. After eating, I thought I would just try to get some sleep. There wasn't much else I could do. It should have been chilly since it was the middle of May, but I woke up in the middle of the night sweating in my sleeping bag. A quick glance at my watch told me it was just after 2 a.m. The air in the tent was warm and stale, so I pulled the zipper down to let some fresh, cool night air in. I gasped. The blue tent was right in front of my tent. The strange lights came on in the tent again. 2 hands pressed against the dirty fabric of the blue tent. The person in the tent was reaching towards me in the darkness. For a moment I felt so distant, so stunned, but I quickly came to my senses and grabbed my torch and pointed it at the blue tent. Whatever was in that tent was groping around to grab the zip and get out. It must have heard me and saw my torchlight. I ran for it. I didn't dare look back behind me. I fell in the swamp as I ran. My lower body was soaking. I didn't let that stop me though. It was pitch black. As I ran, I tripped and stumbled countless times, but I was determined to get away from that tent. I somehow lost my torch along the way. When I physically couldn't run anymore, I crouched by a tree and shivered in fear and waited for the morning light. When morning came, I walked back to the place my tent was, and that other tent. I called to let my presence be known. I was done with being scared. I just spent a whole night out in the freezing cold. I shouted out again, but there was no response, so I approached. Both tents were still there. The blue tent looked a bit more worn and haggard. I looked inside my tent. It seems as if the person or the people in the blue tent had left me a parting gift. A pile of bones. Human bones, animal bones. I have no idea. They were all mashed up. I don't do solo trips that deep in the mountains or the woods anymore. A few years back, a bunch of friends and I went camping in Ibaraki during spring vacation. It was May. The weather was good. I went with 3 friends, so 4 men in total. 3 of my friends go to this camp basically every year, but for me it was my first time. I hadn't been camping with these guys before, but I was excited to join them. They sold it to me pretty well. They said the beach was beautiful. They said that there is usually not that many people around on the beach, so we could do whatever we felt like without others bothering us or annoying us. After coming off National Highway 51 and going down a narrow road for a few 100 meters, we arrived at the beach. We saw a family camper van just by the entrance to the beach, so we decided to pitch up away from them, about 200 meters. By lunch, the beach was full of surfers, but by dinner time, they had all cleared off. The beach was empty, for as far as the eye could see, except for the family camper van, just us and them. As there were no lights around, and it was so quiet, I fell asleep way faster than usual. We all slept in the same tent. 3 of the guys slept side by side, and I slept at the bottom by their feet near the zipper of the tent. Kinda like a dog. I woke up in the middle of the night with a desperate urge to piss. I thought I was going to piss my pants. I checked the time on my phone and it was past 2 a.m. I've never been one of those people who are too afraid of the dark or superstitious in any way. So that night I was listening to the waves as I was getting up. It was really relaxing. The only problem was I heard another sound. It was clear and distinct, and it made me freeze in my sleeping bag. It was coming from no more than 5 meters away. It was a strange sound. It was coming closer to our tent. From the weight and the interval of each sound, I intuitively felt that it was footsteps. I couldn't see any light outside. Walking along a secluded sandy beach with no flashlight? That's pretty strange. We were a good distance away from the family camper van, so they would have no reason to be walking so close to our tent. Plus, I heard the footsteps coming from the opposite direction. Is this a person? It sounds human with its slow, deliberate steps. My head was spinning. I was sweating in the darkness of the tent, and I didn't dare to move a muscle. It was already too late. I could hear those footsteps circling our tent. They sounded like they were right outside, no more than 10 centimeters away. Whatever it was, started walking around our tent clockwise, just circling it. What the fuck are you doing? I wondered. What do I do? I thought of trying to wake one of my friends, but I didn't want to make a sound. I was too afraid to leave my sleeping bag. I fought the urge to use the bathroom, and I just tried to stay as still as possible. I hoped and prayed that the footsteps would just go away, but things got worse. The footsteps continued circling clockwise, going round and around. Then something occasionally prodded the thin layer of fabric on our tent, like a hand testing for a weak point of entry. The metal poles supporting the tent began to creak and bend. It made a horrible sound. I tried thinking of a song in my head, and I kept repeating the lyrics and melody over and over. Just ignore it, it'll go away, I told myself, and I closed my eyes tightly. And then it was bright outside of my tent. I must have drifted off. I was so relieved. I ran out there quickly, to pee, idiotically forgetting about last night. I looked back at the tent and I saw footprints. I will never understand this, but the footprints came from the sea and led back to the sea. I immediately woke my 3 friends up. I told them what happened, and we decided to get the hell off of that beach. The next night we stayed in an area with lots of camper vans and other tourists.